Undefined and null in JavaScript. A lot of people think they're basically the same thing, but they're not. And by the end of this video, you will know the difference too between null and undefined, why they both exist, and why you might want to use one over the other. So first, a bit of history on null. The concept of a null value comes from other languages and systems where it typically represents the intentional absence of any value. For example, in a relational database like SQL, a null value signifies the absence of a value in a column. JavaScript was created by Brendan Eich in a mere 10 days in 1995 for Netscape. And so given the speed of the language's development, some decisions were made very quickly and without the lengthy scrutiny that might come with a more extended development. So undefined was introduced as a primitive value to indicate when a variable had been declared but has not been assigned a value. So it represents a system-level absence of a value. Null, on the other hand, was intended to represent a program-level or intentional absence of value. So that's something that you, the developer, set when you want to explicitly indicate this variable has no value. In TypeScript, explicit type annotations for null and undefined both exist. So you can declare a field or a variable as able to store a string or null or undefined, or any combination of these. Now let me show you one little quirk that often trips people up in JavaScript. So here we've got a TypeScript file, and in here we can declare a variable as null and assign null to it, or we can declare something as undefined and assign undefined to it. Or we can declare a type in TypeScript that can be a combination of either a string or null or undefined. And so we can assign anything into that, either a string or null or undefined. So let me show you a little quirk of JavaScript that trips a lot of people up when they're dealing with null and undefined. And you might have seen this before. If I do console.log null equals undefined with two equal signs, that's going to return true. Now, what if I did console.log null equals undefined with three equal signs? Well, that's actually going to return false. And the reason that is because null and undefined are similar enough that they both resolve to falsy when doing a JavaScript comparison, but they're not actually exactly the same. So the difference between the double equals and the triple equals in JavaScript is that the double equals is looking for two values that equate to either both falsy or truey, which, for example, a 0 would be falsy, or null would be falsy, or 1 would be truey. So if they're both falsy, then that will equate to true. Whereas the triple equals in JavaScript says they actually have to be the same type. So if I did log 1 triple equals false, or true, sorry, in triple equals, that would be false. So null and undefined with a triple equals is going to be false, because null and undefined are actually two different types of data. So let's have a look at a practical example of this. If I create an object in here, and I give it an ID property that is a string, and I'll just instantiate this to a blank object. So if I access this variable here and just do console.log object.id, that's going to return me undefined, because even though I've created the object, I haven't signed anything to that ID property. If I wanted to actually do something in the function and say that, do you know what, my object is going to have an ID, but it's not going to have anything in there, like I've explicitly set the ID property to null, then what I'll have to do is I'll have to say that this ID can be a string or it can be null, and I can set it to null down here. So this is actually a little bit more declarative in terms of the way that your code is interpreted and the way your code is understood by other engineers and by yourself in the future. Because you're actually saying, I want to put null into this value. I want this value to be either a string or a null value that I've put in there myself. And that's different to just having it with a question mark, which means it can be undefined. So when might you want to use null over undefined? Well, null is generally used when there's a need to define something with the intention of showing that the value exists as nothing. Whereas undefined is used when you simply haven't done anything with that field yet. Now, lots of common errors are caused by confusing null and undefined in JavaScript, especially when accessing properties from these values. Trying to access a property of an undefined or a null variable will result in a type error indicating cannot read property of undefined or cannot read property of null. And you can actually use those two different error messages to your advantage. If you use null to mean I've set this to nothing explicitly, like we've been talking about in this video, then when you see cannot read property of null, you know that you've tried to read something that you yourself has explicitly set to nothing in your code. Whereas if you see cannot read property of undefined, it's most likely that your code has done something wrong. So that might actually help you work out what is causing the error in the future. It's imperative to understand when using null and undefined that to consistently use one or the other to represent missing or absent values is extremely important. Use null when you want to explicitly state that a variable shall have no value, and use undefined for variables that haven't been assigned a value yet. Remember, consistency is key here to keep your code predictable and understandable by both other developers and by you in the future. So I hope you found this video useful. Please do check out my other videos on the channel, and of course subscribe to Train to Code here on YouTube. My name's James Charlesworth, and I'll see you in the next one.